Once again, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. You're visiting us, and this is your first time here at the Southeast Church of Christ. We welcome you. We thank you for your presence. We're always encouraged and motivated by having friends visiting us here. And if this is not the first time, but you've been here before, we also are very enthusiastic with your repeat visit, and we hope that you will continue to talk to us and let us get to know you and get to befriend you. What have we been studying on Wednesday evenings? Remember, today's Wednesday, not Sunday, right? Proverbs, very good. Now, 2 weeks ago, we mentioned this section here, right? As we've been seeing chapter 6. And it's very interesting what happens next. So, where are my mathematicians in here? What does that say in terms of math? Okay? Or we can also say 16 through 19 is greater than, right? When we talk about less than, greater than, in the way that I've written on a board, what we're going to see is that when we read this and we compare it to what follows, there's an increase in wickedness. There's an increase in wickedness. So in verses 12 through 15, you see, of course, a person who has already sinned, a person who is a sinner, right? And let's go ahead and read it again. It says, a worthless person, a wicked man, walks with a perverse mouth. He winks with his eyes, he shuffles his feet, he points with his fingers. Perversity is in his heart, he devises evil continually. He sows discord, therefore his calamity shall come suddenly. Suddenly he shall be broken without remedy. Now, in verse 12, right, notice that this person is known as worthless, right? The worthless man. The Hebrew word is Belial, right? Belial. Someone who brings no value, someone who does not contribute in any way, any positive way of what's going on. Now notice verse 16. What does he increase to, or what is his route or his path if he continues to do or continues to walk in that path of wickedness? He goes from being worthless to being what? An abomination. An abomination to whom, John? That's pretty bad, isn't it? That's very bad. But what we see when we begin to see this section of Proverbs is that, have you ever heard of the expression, you go from bad to worse, right? Have you been seeing, I believe I mentioned this the last time we studied this, that in chapter 6 from the very beginning, every section is getting worse and worse, right? In verses 6 through 11, we went from someone without direction, someone with no desire, someone who has nothing to aspire to, and then verses 12 through 15, I use the expression, there's nothing more dangerous than someone that has nothing to lose. Well, verses 16 through 19 would disagree with me. There is something worse than someone who has nothing to lose. Verses 16 through 19, someone who now has found pleasure and has found great taste as a great delight in avidly practicing wickedness. Do you recall what the condition of the world was when Noah came around? Turn with me to Genesis, right? Genesis chapter 6. Say that again? Evil continually, right? Genesis chapter 6. We're going to start there at verse 3. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And notice verse 7. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. So notice that here the warning in Proverbs, right, is that this is when you are first in the poison. This is when you have first started sinning, because now you're trying to entertain yourself. You have nothing better to do. You have no direction. You have no purpose, right? But like any poison, the longer it festers, the more potent it becomes. It's one thing to have a wicked thought or a sinful thought and to deal with it, right? It's another one where you're now trying to make it worse. Well, how can I make this a lot more proficient? Let me give you an example. Question: who created crucifixion? Who invented it? The Assyrians. Who perfected it? The Romans. Which one was worse? The Roman crucifixion. It was perfected. The Assyrians, it was very brutal. It was very bad. But the Romans actually made it into a science. For them to be known as the ones who perfected it, it means that they actually took a liking to this form of punishment. You know a little bit of history. Crucifixion originally was reserved only for conquered kings or runaway slaves. The fact that Jesus is declared as king by the Jews who wanted him crucified proves this historical fact. But notice, something that's bad can become worse. And that's what we see here in this section of Proverbs. So in order for us to understand and have a better understanding of this, notice how what in Proverbs 6:16 through 19, what it means, or how Genesis 6 can be described there. What it means to think in evil continually. What it means to find ways to make or perfect your sinful deed, right? How you want to do or want to make it not only something where you want to get caught, but something that brings you pleasure and it's evil, something that you have now relished in. You had to raise your hand, Brother Kevin? No? Okay. So notice it begins there at verse 13, right? He winks with his eyes. Now, before I get there, what does the word abomination mean? What does it mean that he becomes an abomination? So this is someone that worthless. When you look at the original Hebrew, it's saying someone who is useless, right? Someone who does not contribute. How can someone worthless or useless become worse? Kevin?
The Hebrew word means a disgusting thing, in ritual, unclean food, idolatry, mixed marriages. It's about the lowest of all.
So you go from being useless to being detestable, right? You become something disgusting, as the brother brought up. Yes. That is what happens, yes. They originally, right, they commit sin, they get a taste for it, but then now they're trying to figure out ways how to amplify it, right? So yes, Romans 1:18 through 22 is what's in your mind probably, where they changed the nature of man, yes. So Romans 1:18 and forward is this section right here. We can talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. That was them, right? We can talk about, we already said, right? Noah, the pre-flood days. We can talk about Nineveh. We can talk about Jerusalem, right? Notice that they all increase their wickedness to a point where God sees them as a detestable, disgusting. Their sin is so putrefied, right? And again, think about something, right? Think about something that smells, something that has rotted, and it's in a sealed jar. How many of you would be willing to open that sealed jar after a year and take a good big whiff of what's in there? Many times it becomes so festered, right? That it even comes out, the smell comes out through the jar that's been sealed. Well, that's what happens when we continue in sin and don't turn away from it. When we remain in sin and we continue to do it, it begins to fester, it begins to putrefy. Brother Zach, can you raise your hand?
So we open this jar before man tries all of here. When knowingly.
Yes. Sister Renee?
The detestable brings to mind Revelation 3:16, where, so then because you're lukewarm, neither hot or cold, I will spew you out of my mouth. Nothing to do with you. I can't even want to get a taste of it.
I'm going to need you to stop looking at my notes, sister. Brother Joe?
It's got, by explaining all this, I look at the world right now, and it seems to be going from bad to worse.
And Peter and Paul talks about that, right? He says that in the last days they will go from bad to worse. Well, why is that the case? If you think about it from the logical standpoint, it makes sense. The longer you take to tend to a wound, the better it becomes, right? Does that make sense, Joel? What happens with the wound if I leave it unattended? And what can it lead to? You'll die in pieces, right? Well, the word abomination, if you do a word study, if you actually go into the word study and you look into it, the etymology and everything that you can, as Sister Renee mentioned, it gives off the idea of it makes me want to vomit. It's nauseating. It's something that when I see it or when I smell it, I'm in its presence, makes me gag. So notice what God is saying. Someone who went from being useless, who brings and does not offer or contribute anything, to now someone who is actively disrupting. Someone who is purposely now trying to take away instead of add. Someone who's trying to destroy instead of edify. This is the person who doesn't study and misunderstands the scripture. This is the person who's understanding the scripture and purposely is twisting it for their own gain. Here is the false teacher, the false prophet. Here is the erring brother, the brother in sin. You see that? So the longer we practice sin, the longer we're in it, the more detestable we become in the presence of God, because we're giving and allowing sin to grow. Notice now we go back, right? Verse 13, he winks with his eyes. Verse 17, how does it increase? He goes from winking his eyes to what? A proud look. A proud look. He winks with his eyes, right? Now it becomes a proud look. Now I take pride in what I do. Now I look at you with defiance. A proud look is that person, I don't know if anyone here, I did want to ask Sister Briggs, but I probably won't. If Lucy was always the one that would say, right, doesn't hurt, right? It doesn't hurt. You can hit me all you want. It doesn't hurt, right? That's the proud look. The proud look of defiance, that they're not willing to show you and they're not willing to give you the satisfaction that what you are doing is hurting them. That even though they know they're wrong, they're never going to admit they're wrong. They have that proud look, right? They look at you and they're daring you. I dare you. I dare you to challenge me. I dare you to try to tell me that I'm wrong. Well, someone turn to Exodus chapter 10. Exodus chapter 10 and read verses 1 through 3 for me. Exodus chapter 10, verses 1 through 3.
The Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart, and the heart of his servants, that I might show these my signs before him, and that thou mayest tell in the ears of thy son, and of thy son's son, what things I have wrought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that ye may know how that I am the Lord. And Moses and Aaron came in unto Pharaoh, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, How long wilt thou refuse to humble thyself before me?
So notice that in verse 1, God says that he was going to harden his heart, right? Verse 3, he explains how. Very simple. The Bible explains itself. How long will you refuse? So what are we learning here? The more God told him not to do something, or the more God told him to do something, he was going to do what? God told him, let my people go. Pharaoh said, I'm going to keep them. Does anyone know how many plagues had already happened by this point in chapter 10? Anyone know? 7 plagues had already happened. The 8th one was about to take place. 7 plagues in. Egypt's economy was shattered by now. The people had suffered abundantly with all the plagues that had already happened. Their cattle and livestock had died. Their houses had been filled with flies and with frogs. And still, Pharaoh refused. He had that proud look. He stood firm in the way he began when Moses and Aaron first appeared. Who is the Lord, your God, whom I should do what he asks? He stood firm. He died by that. You know, he winked his eye when he first said that, but as we like to say in our time, he doubled down, didn't he? He doubled down, and the more that God spoke to him, the more that God tried to get him to turn around, to come around, the more that he put himself down. Remember the warning there in Psalm 1? Remember when we first began in Psalm 1:1? The man who is blessed is the one who does not sit with the wicked, right? You know, the Pharaoh of Egypt is an example of a very obstinate, very obdurate heart. A man who we could say he was stubborn as a mule, right? An expression that talks about an animal that when that animal sits, no matter how often you beat it and how often you try to move it, you're not going to move them. You're not going to move them. They're set, we say, in their ways. So in Proverbs 6, right, notice that you go from winking your eye to having a proud look. That look of defiance, that look of I know I'm wrong, but what are you going to do about it? Right? It's about those people who often get away with it, and therefore because they get away with it, they come to believe that they are invincible. They come to believe that, you know, they're always going to be able to get away with it. Brother Joe?
You know, it says there, for I have hardened his heart. It's not that the Lord hardens our hearts, it's that that's what we want.
Mm-hmm.
We ourselves are the ones are, and so the Lord said, this is what you want, this is what I will give you. And so that's why we go from bed to work, because we don't want to admit that we're wrong.
Not only we don't want to admit, we don't want to obey, right? We don't want to obey. Notice the next part. He shuffles his feet. right? He shuffles his feet. What happens next? The lying tongue. Wait a minute, but why does the shuffling of feet, why is it increased by the lying tongue? Well, what's another way of saying someone who shuffles their feet?
Obstinate, slow, resistant.
How about the word shifty? Someone who is shifty. Can you trust someone who is shifty? Why not, Sister Tasha? Yeah. They're always switching feet, right? Someone who shuffles their feet, right? They're dodgy. You can't hit them. They know how to move. They don't walk because they're trying to not get caught. They're trying not to be heard. The reason they're shuffling their feet is because they're walking deceptively and they're trying to creep up on you. Well, a lying tongue is someone now who has become an expert at deception. You know, a person before who's learning how to lie, well, they have to be shifty, right? They have to walk carefully so that they won't get caught because that fear is there. But someone who's become proficient at lying, it rolls right off their tongue, and so much so that they believe their own lie. They believe their own lie. They can lie straight to your face and you would never know it. I've been across the table from people like that before. You know, I've been caught by people like that. And, you know, it's scary. Personally, from my personal experience, it is scary how well and how proficient they are at lying. Because they first have to believe what they're selling. They have to buy into what they're selling. That's their trick. They make themselves believe it so that when they're saying it to you, they're actually in their mind defending what is their truth. They've convinced themselves that they're innocent. Right? Notice Psalm 14. The foolish man says what? There is no God. There are many in the world who are convinced there is no God. But why does the foolish man say that? They've become proficient at lying, right? They've become proficient at sinning. If there is no God, there is no moral code, and if there is no moral code, I cannot be guilty of sin. But pay attention to the sophistication of that lie. Okay, well, if there is no God, what happens when we die? Oh, well, we cease to exist. You see how false religion begins? It's one lie after the other lie after the other lie, and they get so good at it. They become so sophisticated at it that they can cover up, and they learn their lies. They learn them, and they've learned how to defend them, and they learn, not only that, how to twist scripture as if it were some form of puppet that speaks what they want to speak. At first, right, they're just trying not to get caught. They're shifty, they're shuffling. Now they can go into a room and claim that they are the President of the United States, and they will carry themselves where people will actually think that they are. It's amazing, right, when we start comparing this. Notice the next one. He points with his fingers. He points with his fingers. Notice now that his hands are what? It's one thing to point and accuse someone so that they can get caught. It's another when you're the one who's actually harming. You go from blaming someone else. You go from, being a false witness, right? Yes. Yes. Adam? And I'm not pointing my finger at you, just answering your.
Get in their face.
You're accusing them, yeah.
You want to speak up. Yourself.
So getting up in their face and pointing at them is not the same as actually doing what? Punching them, right? You're threatening when you point the finger. You're threatening when you're accusing them. But now you're actually causing harm. You're acting upon the emotion. You're acting upon your wrath. So it goes, right? Once again, notice the increase. If we do not know how to control our emotions, if we allow what perhaps started as an outburst of rage to become full-blown wrath, where wrath takes over and blinds us, right? A blind fury, they call it. Not only are we going to say, but eventually we're going to do. Over here, we'll probably regret it. Over here, we now have become experts at doing it. The more we practice sin, the more we perfect it. The more that we perfect it, the better we become in doing it. That's not a good thing. That's not what we want. So, verse 14, perversity is in his heart, a heart that devises wicked plans. Once again, notice the increase. Now, what did we read in Genesis 6? They went from falling away, right, from God to now finding ways to sin. They were continually thinking in evil thoughts.
All the time, they always have to make something big out of nothing.
They always got to do something big out of nothing, but pay attention once again there as we're reading, right? Perversity is in his heart. He thinks about things that he shouldn't be, right? He has these wicked thoughts. Now in verse 18, he's trying to find a way to carry them out. How can I continue to do this without getting caught? Not only that, how can I bring others into my ring so that I can make this a larger thing? You know, Vegas wasn't always Vegas. Think about that. They started with a perverse heart of greed, right? And then they did what? Oh, there's other people who are just as greedy as I am. I can take their money and make them believe they're having fun. And they created an entire city that revolves around gambling, that revolves around perversity. And then they came up with a very catchy slogan. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It's called Sin City. And what do? They take what? Pride in being Sin City. So a heart, right, that devises wickedness is not just with them anymore, and it's not just a thought anymore. It's a full-blown plan. And it is an active plan, a plan that is being executed, right? Not only do they want their friends involved, they want everyone involved, right? They want to be the kings of the world. So once more, notice how it continues to increase. And then, of course, it begins more and more to make sense. Why to God? It is an abomination, isn't it? Because these useless ideas are now being used for wickedness. All this free time spent in only thinking in evil has now become into these full-blown, dangerous plans that are now being enacted. It says, he devises evil continually. His feet are swift in running to evil. They can't wait. There's excitement. You know, when I was studying this, I remember when I was in middle school. The middle school that I went to was not in a good neighborhood. I did not grow up in a good neighborhood in Houston, unfortunately. But I remember that there was one word that no matter where we were, was like a magnet that attracted all of us, and we all ran where that word was coming from. Fight. Fight. It's good to see that I'm not the only one that grew up in the hood, right? Yeah, fight. Why did you know it was fight, Brother John?
Experience.
Experience? I hope you weren't the one fighting, brother. Yes. And the way they said it, right? It wasn't scared. It wasn't like, you know, they were trying to get away from it. No, they were calling it out like if there was a ring and we're about to see a boxing match, right? It was entertainment. And we heard fight. And, you know, hey, my brothers have admitted it, so will I. I would run. You know, and I remember not only did I run, bets started to happen. Right? You know, my loophole of getting out, I would say, well, I'm not going to bet money. I'll just bet lunch. You know, that was my loophole. As you can tell, thankfully, I was still here. But notice, what happens when you're on the freeway? All of a sudden, the other side of the freeway is blocked and you see an accident happen. Everybody wants to go. Everybody wants to see. But here, it's not talking about going to see. This is the one who's originating it. This is the one who runs to start the fight. This is the one who runs and acts quickly to get this plan into motion. They find excitement in doing these things. They find a lot of joy in causing harm to others and seeing chaos. You know, brethren, this right here in verse 18, this final part of verse 18 teaches me a very, very scary thing. There are people who want to see the world burn. Unfortunately, there are men and women in our world, even today, as they were during Solomon's time when he wrote this, who all they want is anarchy. You know, in the book of Judges, remember how it ends in anarchy? There were people who led the Israelites to that anarchy. Not only do they lead to anarchy, they fight to defend it, to keep it that way. Again, I go back to the example of Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. That's a state of anarchy. You know, I was thinking about this, and I was actually looking at it, the things that are permissible in Vegas that are not permissible in most of the country. I was like, wow, this is a contradictory city. What in other parts of the United States is called illegal, they've legalized. It's backwards. And the federal government can't do anything about it because they're being bribed by all the taxes and everything that they pay, right? Notice how they defend their state of anarchy. Notice how they defend and protect the evil that they've so meticulously created. That's a scary thought. Because what that tells me is in the church, those false Christians that Paul worried about, according to 2 Corinthians 11, there were Christians whose own goal and desire was to cause discord and division among the church. Christians who take joy and pride in taking down entire congregations. Diotrephes was one of them, wasn't he? He wanted the first places. He wanted the power, he wanted the control. And he wouldn't even allow John to arrive there to that congregation. So as we begin to wrap up, right? Here in verse 15, therefore his calamity shall come suddenly, suddenly he shall be broken without remedy, right? Or excuse me, verse 14, he sows discord. Well, verse 19, a false witness who speaks lies and one who sows discord among brethren. Now, we have to be careful because in the final verses of verses 16 through 19, it's almost as if it's increasing, right? But what the Bible's teaching us is, no, all of this together, all of it, now that we've seen it in comparison to 12 through 15, is an abomination. Because here, you're just starting. But here, you've become experienced. Here, you are in sin. Here, you are in defiance, which is sin. But it is a festered type of sin, yes? Here, it's a once in a while type action that you'll do it ever so often. Here, it's your lifestyle. This is who you are. This is who you become. And your mind is only thinking evil continually. Yes, Grandma.
Vegas, in regard to them getting worse to the point that they are. In regard to what AJ said, right here in San Antonio, our past mayor, our present mayor, and whatever, not only do they have great gay pride parades, our city officials encourage it and advertise it.
Yeah.
And on the walkway is painted with rainbow colors. So, and it's accepted and encouraged, and there's a Pride Month. So, we don't have, not us particularly, but our city, our society.
Our society.
have got to learn.
And you know what's dangerous about that? Because we're here now as a society. Now those who are trying to be righteous and those who speak out against it, now they're in the wrong.
It's worse. Teaching food.
Yes. Let's go to Isaiah 5 because they already opened the doors on us real quick. Isaiah chapter 5. Notice the second column, what it culminates in, as we see there in Isaiah chapter 5. And by the way, here the prophet is being inspired and he is describing the society of Israel during his time. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20 and verse 21. Woe to those who will call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and the light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. That's this column right here. They can no longer distinguish right from wrong. Why? Because they don't want to. They don't want to. So because of their abominable state before God, they have gotten people to believe that they're in the right and those who are in the right are in the wrong. Our time is up. Thank you all for your participation. Let's have a quick prayer and we will pick this up if our God gives us life next Wednesday.